Rain fell the morning Clara Whitmore was sold to salvation. Not in coins, nor contracts, but in reputation, the one currency a woman could never earn back once it was spent. By dusk, every window in the village glowed with candlelight, each one a witness to her disgrace. They whispered that the vicar's daughter was desperate. That she had bartered her youth for comfort. That some faceless man, too old, too sick, too strange, had offered her the price of her family's dignity. And though Clara did not hear the words spoken aloud, she felt them pressing against the glass as she walked past the market square, her boots damp with the week's mud, her gloves thin enough to feel the cold sting of judgment. Inside the vicarage, the air smelled faintly of ink and mildew. Her father slept in his chair, head bent beneath the weight of sermons he no longer had strength to write. Her mother, a frail woman once radiant in youth, sat by the fire twisting the hem of her shawl. Clara stood at the threshold, the letter still unopened in her hands, a letter sealed with crimson wax and a name she did not yet know. Her mother looked up. "It's from him." "Yes," Clara whispered. "Then read it, my dear. We cannot pretend we have a choice." The paper trembled between her fingers. The words were simple, businesslike. "Mr. Harland requests a wife of respectable birth and quiet temperament. A union of convenience. No dowry required. Generous provision to follow." She read it twice before she understood what it meant. The gentleman was ill, perhaps dying, and required companionship for his remaining months. His solicitor had written to the parish, seeking a young woman of virtue and modest expectation. Her mother's lips pressed into a prayer, though the words came out broken. "He will save us, Clara. You must see that." Clara folded the letter carefully. She did not feel saved. She felt pawned. That night she sat by her father's bedside, listening to the wheeze of his breath and the clock ticking away the hours she still had left as herself. On the table beside him lay his Bible, its spine cracked and pages marked by years of sermon notes. When he stirred, she took his hand. "Papa," she said softly, "if I marry him, the parish debts will be settled. You'll keep your post." He smiled faintly, eyes still closed. "My brave girl," he murmured. "May God reward what the world will not." She kissed his hand. The warmth of his skin lingered as she packed her meager belongings, the ribbon her mother once wore at her own wedding, a single book of poems, and a hair comb with a missing tooth. By morning, the story had spread. The butcher's wife swore the man was hideous. The schoolmistress insisted he was rich. Someone said he lived in a crumbling house far from London, and that his first wife had died of sorrow. No one spoke to Clara directly, they simply watched as she crossed the square toward the church, her borrowed veil trailing in the wind. The wedding was arranged at twilight. Rain pelted the windows in soft fury, turning the churchyard into a mirror of grey. The vicar, her father's assistant, read the vows with haste, his voice echoing faintly against the stone walls. Only two witnesses stood by, the solicitor, pale and officious, and a housekeeper who smelled faintly of lavender and resignation. When the groom arrived, a hush swept through the room. He entered in a wheeled chair, draped in a dark coat, his face obscured by shadow. His hair, once black, was streaked with silver though he could not yet be 35. His hands were gloved, his voice low and even. "Miss Whitmore," he said, inclining his head, "you do me great honor." Clara curtsied. "You do me necessity, sir." The faintest smile touched his lips. "Then we are both satisfied." The ceremony lasted scarcely 10 minutes. When it ended, the solicitor pressed the papers into Clara's hand, and she signed them with deliberate grace, her name inked beside a stranger's. Her husband, Mr. Harland, did not rise to kiss her hand. He merely bowed his head, whispering, "You have my gratitude." Outside, the rain thickened. The villagers who had come to glimpse the spectacle watched as the new bride stepped into the waiting carriage. Her mother clutched her hand through the open door. "You will write to us?" she asked. "Every week," Clara promised. Her mother's eyes filled with tears. "He may be ill, but illness is kinder than hunger. Remember that." The door closed with a hollow click. The horses stirred, hooves splashing through puddles as the carriage lurched forward. Clara pressed her forehead against the cold windowpane, the village lights receding into darkness. Inside the carriage, silence reigned. Mr. Harland sat opposite her, his profile lit only by the lantern's trembling glow. The rain painted moving shadows across his face, sharp cheekbones, a weary mouth, eyes that seemed to drift somewhere far beyond the moment. "You are cold," he said quietly. "There is a blanket beside you." "Thank you." She unfolded it, fingers brushing the soft wool. The air smelled faintly of cedar and something faintly metallic, medicine, perhaps. For a long while they said nothing. The rhythm of the wheels became the measure of her thoughts, each turn another mile away from all she had known. At last he spoke again. "I do not ask for affection, Mrs. Harland. Only civility. In return, you shall have comfort, and my word that you will never be mistreated. She met his gaze. And when you die, sir? What then? He regarded her for a long moment, as though the question had not been asked but predicted. Then you will be free, he said softly. And perhaps, by then, I shall have done one good thing. The carriage hit a rut, jolting them both. His hand went to his chest briefly, a flicker of pain crossing his features, but he said nothing. Clara looked away, uncertain whether to pity or fear him. Outside, the rain eased into mist. The moor stretched endlessly, pale and spectral under the moonlight. Clara tried to imagine her new home, the estate whispered about, Ravenshire Hall, but all she could picture was a vast house filled with echoes, and a husband whose heart seemed buried with the life he once had. She closed her eyes and thought of her father's voice, her mother's shawl, the warmth of the small hearth now miles behind her. She had traded all of it for safety, and yet the safety felt like a coffin. When she opened her eyes again, the carriage was climbing a narrow hill. At the crest stood the faint outline of a mansion, its windows dim, its chimneys trailing thin smoke against the night sky. Mr. Harland shifted, as though waking from some private memory. Ravenshire Hall, he murmured. Your new home, Mrs. Harland. The name hung between them, heavy as prophecy. Clara watched the looming structure grow larger, until its dark silhouette filled the horizon like a waiting fate. She felt a tremor, not of fear, but of something colder, deeper, and unnamed. The horses slowed, the wheels ground to a stop, and a servant appeared with a lantern held high. As the door opened, the scent of rain-soaked earth rushed in. Mr. Harland gestured for her to step down first. She hesitated only a moment before placing her gloved hand in his. His fingers were cool, steady, and startlingly human. Welcome, he said softly. To the end of the beginning. And as she crossed the threshold of Ravenshire Hall, Clara felt not the triumph of a bride, but the quiet ache of a soul being sold to fate. The first scream Clara heard in Ravenshire Hall did not belong to the living. It came from the wind funneling through the long chimneys, a low, shuddering cry that filled the corridors and made the candlelight tremble. The house seemed to breathe around her, vast, ancient, and watchful. Somewhere above, a clock tolled 6, each chime swallowed by the rain still clinging to the windows. Her husband had not yet risen. Mr. Harland, Adrian, though she dared not call him that, remained confined to the east wing, his health too delicate for morning conversation, as the housekeeper had informed her with a curtsy. So Clara ate alone, facing the long table laid with enough silver to feed 20. The silence tasted metallic. A letter waited beside her plate. The handwriting was elegant, slanted, unmistakably masculine. I trust you have slept well. You may find the library more hospitable than the dining room. The fire there is less lonely. She folded the note carefully, her heart quickening at its restraint. Each word was precise, formal, yet beneath them hummed something unspoken, as though he wanted to say more and could not. She rose, gathered her courage, and made her way toward the library. The doors loomed twice her height, carved with ivy and wolves. Inside, the air was thick with dust and warmth, the scent of old paper and burning oak. He sat by the fire, cloaked in a dark robe, his wheelchair angled toward the window. When he turned, the flames caught his face, fine-boned, weary, handsome still, though illness had drained its color. "Good morning, Mrs. Harland," he said softly. "Good morning, sir. Do forgive me. I find breakfast intolerable company." "So do I," she said, before realizing the boldness of her reply. His lips curved faintly. "Then we are of one mind already." It became their pattern, quiet hours spent in half-conversation. She read to him from Shakespeare or Austen, her voice soft but sure. Sometimes he closed his eyes, not from boredom, but from listening too intently. He asked her once what she missed most about home. She told him, the church bells. They made even sadness sound holy. He said nothing for a long while, then murmured, "Here, even joy echoes hollow." Days melted into weeks. His color improved, his posture straighter. She began to see not a dying man, but a wounded one, caged by grief, not sickness. Servants whispered that his first wife's portrait had been burned after the accident that ruined him. No one spoke of the carriage that had gone off the bridge that winter. One evening, as the snow fell thick against the window panes, a knock sounded at the library door. The butler entered with a folded newspaper. "From London, sir. The Gazette." Mr. Harland's hand froze midair. Clara, sensing the tremor, watched as he dismissed the butler with a nod. His eyes scanned the page, the firelight shifted across his face. Then, with sudden violence, he folded the paper and thrust it into the flames. "Forgive me," he said, too quickly. "Old news. Not worth reading." But Clara had seen enough before it burned, the headline clear even in the flicker of firelight. "The Duke of Ravenshire declared dead, estate in probate." She felt the breath leave her lungs. The name, Ravenshire, was carved above the very gate through which she had entered. That night, she could not sleep. The corridor outside her chamber seemed to stretch endlessly, lined with portraits whose painted eyes followed her every step. She paused before one, a man standing beside a horse, his posture proud, his gaze alive with purpose. Beneath it, a small plaque read, Adrian Harland, 8th Duke of Ravenshire. Her husband's face stared back at her from the oil paint. Younger, unscarred, but him all the same. A floorboard creaked behind her. She turned to find him there, in his robe, leaning heavily on a cane. For the first time, he stood. "Forgive me," he said, his voice unsteady. "I had hoped you would not find that." The lamplight struck his features differently now, less fragile, more formidable. Clara stepped back, confusion giving way to anger. "Then it's true? You are the Duke?" He closed his eyes briefly, as if the word pained him. "I was. The world believes me gone. Perhaps they are right to. Why hide it? Why deceive me?" He looked at her, and for once there was no mask. "Because the world I left behind valued only what title I bore. When they mourned me, they mourned a name, not a man. I wished to see if kindness existed without the crown." "And so you purchased a wife to test it?" Her voice shook. "You deceived me into pity." "Not pity," he said quietly. "Peace. You were the first soul who spoke to me without fear or expectation. I needed to know that such a thing still lived." Clara's chest tightened. The air between them trembled with heat and silence. Outside, the snow smothered the grounds in pale silence, but inside, everything burned. "You think kindness is something you can buy," she said. "But you've only traded one cage for another." He flinched, not from her words, but from their truth. For a moment, she almost pitied him again, until the old pain in her father's eyes rose to memory. Every sacrifice she'd made, the whispers, the humiliation, the life abandoned, had been for honesty, not disguise. "I will not be another ghost haunting this house," she said softly. He took a step toward her, the cane shaking under his weight. "Then tell me what you will be. A woman who remembers what she's worth." Something in his expression faltered then, pride breaking like thin glass. "And if I beg your forgiveness?" She hesitated, the fire reflecting in his eyes like the last glow of a dying star. "Then you are not the man I married," she whispered. "Because the man I married would never ask for it." He reached for her hand, but she withdrew it. The silence stretched, long and heavy. Then, faintly, from the hall below, a bell chimed, the signal of an arriving guest. A servant appeared breathless in the doorway. "Your Grace, pardon, sir. Lord Wentham has arrived unexpectedly. He demands an audience." The Duke turned sharply. "Wentham." His voice hardened. "I gave orders, no visitors." He insisted, "My lord. Says he bears news of your resurrection." Clara's breath caught. The Duke's gaze found hers across the room, no longer the calm of a stranger, but the dread of a hunted man. "Go to your room," he said softly. "And whatever you hear tonight, do not come down." But Clara did not move. The truth hung between them like a blade unsheathed, his secret, her betrayal, their fragile peace already bleeding out. The wind screamed again through the chimneys, louder now, almost human. Somewhere deep in the house, footsteps echoed, growing nearer. And as the Duke turned toward the doorway, his cane trembling in his grasp, Clara understood with terrible certainty that whatever tragedy had begun in this house was not yet finished, and that her place in it had only just begun. The first gunshot split the night like lightning tearing through silk. Clara jolted upright in her bed, the sound still echoing through the cold halls of Ravenshire Hall. For a heartbeat, there was only silence, the kind that feels like the world holding its breath. Then came the footsteps, heavy and hurried, crossing the marble floors below. She didn't think. She ran. Barefoot, she tore through the corridor, her nightdress whipping around her legs as the storm outside clawed at the windows. A servant rushed past her in terror, murmuring something about the Duke and the intruder. Her heart pounded so violently it drowned everything else out. When she reached the grand staircase, the scene below looked frozen in chaos. Lord Wentham stood in the entryway, rain-soaked and livid, his pistol lowered. Before him, Adrian, her husband, the Duke she had thought frail and dying, stood upright, pale but defiant. Blood ran in a thin red thread down his sleeve. "Good God," Clara whispered, but neither man heard. "You've hidden well, cousin," Wentham spat, voice trembling with triumph. "The dead Duke walks again. I suppose that means your widow's estate must be reclaimed." Adrian's reply came low and calm, but it carried the chill of command. "You're trespassing on Ravenshire land, Wentham. And unless you've come to deliver your apology, I suggest you turn back before I forget we share blood." Wentham laughed, a jagged, bitter sound. "Apology? You left me to rule in ashes. Do you think the crown will let you reclaim a title already buried? You're no duke anymore. You're a ghost that refused to stay dead." Adrian's jaw tightened. Better a ghost with honor than a vulture living off carrion. Clara moved closer, her voice cutting through their fury. Stop this, both of you. You'll bring ruin on us all. They turned, and for the first time, she saw it, the depth of what bound them. Not just rivalry. Betrayal. Wentham's gaze flicked to her, and something darkened there. Ah, the new Duchess. Tell me, my dear, did he tell you how his first wife died? No, I imagine not. Too delicate a subject for a man of his fine morality. Adrian took a sharp step forward. Enough. But Wentham pressed on, the cruelty in his smile deliberate. She died on that bridge because he couldn't forgive her. He drove her away, and she followed the river to her grave. That's what your Duke keeps in his east wing, his guilt, not his illness. Clara froze. She wanted to dismiss it as venom, but the way Adrian's eyes fell told her otherwise. Tell him it's not true, she said softly. Please. He said nothing. The silence between them was answer enough. Wentham's laugh broke the moment apart. You see? He buries his women in secrets. Take care you don't drown in them too. Adrian's hand shot out, seizing the pistol before another word could fall. The struggle was brief but brutal, a flash, a cry, and then the gun went off again. Smoke and silence. Wentham collapsed, clutching his shoulder, not dead but broken. The pistol clattered to the marble. Clara's cry shattered the stillness. Adrian. He turned toward her, chest heaving, the fire of fury gone, replaced by something emptier, something that frightened her more. He would have destroyed everything, he murmured. Everything I tried to protect. Clara knelt beside Wentham, pressing her hand to his wound to stop the bleeding. You've already destroyed it, she said, her voice shaking. Adrian staggered back. The candlelight revealed more blood than she'd first seen, his own this time, from a gash across his arm. The pistol's recoil had torn him open. Servants began to gather at the edges of the room, wide-eyed, whispering. Fetch the physician, Clara ordered, but no one moved. They looked to Adrian, waiting for his command instead. Even now, bleeding and damned, he was their master. He closed his eyes. Do as she says, he whispered. When the servants scattered, Clara turned to him. You lied to me about everything. Even your sickness. Even your name. Was any of it real? His voice cracked. You were. That answer should have softened her, but instead it hollowed her out. The physician arrived, a small man who trembled at the sight of nobility undone. Wentham was carried to the guest wing, muttering threats of exposure between clenched teeth. The Duke was escorted to his chambers under Clara's watch. He refused the doctor's aid until she forced him to sit. Let me, she said, wrapping his wound in silence. He watched her hands move, steady, precise. You think me a monster, he said at last. I think you're a man who's forgotten what truth feels like. He exhaled shakily. If you knew what truth cost me, you'd understand why I bartered with lies instead. Then let me understand, she whispered. Tell me what happened. He stared at the fire, the light catching in his eyes like something dying. Elizabeth, my first wife, loved the life more than she loved me. When I found she'd given her trust to another, I sent her away. She begged forgiveness, but I turned her from the carriage that night. The storm was worse than I knew. The bridge gave way. By dawn, she was gone. His voice broke on the last word. I wanted to die, too. The world declared me dead, and I let it. Better a corpse than a man who'd killed his wife. Clara's hands froze. She felt the air thicken around them, grief pressing from every side. Then why marry me, she asked, voice trembling. He looked at her as if the answer were both ruin and salvation. Because I thought love might be the only thing left to save me. But I was wrong, wasn't I? Tears stung her eyes, unbidden. You cannot use love as penance, Adrian. It's not forgiveness you need, it's courage. He turned from her, the weight of his guilt bowing his shoulders. Then perhaps I have none left. She stood, her chest tight. Then you'll have to borrow mine. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, quietly, you should leave Ravenshire before dawn. Once Wentham recovers, he'll go to London. He'll tell them I live. And when he does, they'll come for me, and for you. I'm not running. You must. But Clara only shook her head. I've run from enough ghosts. If you face your truth, I'll face it with you. Their eyes met, and something in his expression, hope, fear, disbelief, flickered and broke. Outside, thunder rolled across the hills, shaking the old house to its bones. In that moment, the clock struck midnight. From the corridor came the sound of footsteps, measured, deliberate, drawing closer. Adrian tensed. Clara turned toward the door, her pulse pounding. Who would come at this hour, she whispered. The door creaked open. A shadow stood in the threshold, neither servant nor stranger. Forgive the intrusion, came a voice both familiar and cold. But I believe the Duchess should hear the truth from me, not from the man who buried it. Clara froze. The voice belonged to a woman she had never met, yet one she had seen every day in paint and legend. The woman in the portrait had come back to life.